everyone. My name is Beth Markley. I am the executive director of NAMI Idaho, and I am pleased to introduce Ben Tiefenback. Ben, did I say that last name
That
correctly?
was perfect, actually.
Ben is counsel and director of client services at Commonwealth Community Trust, which is a nonprofit pooled trust administrator that has served over 3,000 beneficiaries across the U.S. who are vulnerable or have a disability. Prior to joining CCT, Mr. Tiefenbach was a trust and estate attorney serving Hampton Roads, the Middle Peninsula, and the Northern Neck. Now, you might need to explain to those of us here in Idaho where that is.
I certainly will. So that is the east coast of Virginia. There is a string of peninsulas surrounded by absolutely lovely coastal marshes. If you happen to like coastal marshes, which I do, having grown up in one. But that is where the city of Newport News, Hampton, Williamsburg, which is near where I live now, a lot of those colonial cities are there, and that's where I do
Fabulous.
a lot of my work.
Awesome. And to continue, his practice focused on estate planning and trust creation and administration, with an emphasis on special needs trust planning due to his personal experiences with special needs issues in his own family. Mr. Tiefenbach currently serves on the board of directors of the Alliance of Pooled Trusts, the first coalition in the United States dedicated to United Pooled Trust providers in establishing best practices for the industry. He also writes for CCT and other publications, including NA News,
Mhm.
and
The
speaks at
National
CLE,
Academy of Elder Law Attorneys.
National Academy, okay, of Elder Law Attorneys. That's terrific. And speaks at CLE seminars and other events across the country. So, Ben, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you.
Beth, thank you for having me. So today we're going to be talking about pooled special needs trusts. The things that you need to know about when they might be helpful, the way you can incorporate them in planning to help the people in your life or people that you're interacting with who are dealing with some disability issues, some special needs issues, things that might make a thing like this helpful. So, oops. There we go. Yeah, there's my bio that Beth just went through. And just to give a little more, when I was in private practice as a trust and estates attorney focused on special needs, I would use pooled special needs trusts to help certain of my clients who fit, the category of people who for whom this kind of vehicle is useful. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about issue spotting. The way to tell when this kind of device is helpful and when it's not the ideal tool. So the purpose of this presentation, this is not legal advice. It is for educational purposes only. You can always contact us after the fact if you'd like to get into a little more detail. Just know that um, don't sue me for anything I say here. So, overview, we are going to be going over um, a number of different topics here. We're going to talk about the nature of pooled trusts. We're going to talk about how they work. We're going to talk about who they can help, the different kinds. We'll talk about some of the like really practical, when the rubber meets the road, how does a beneficiary actually interact with this thing and get their money, have it used for their benefit. And throughout this, I'm going to have my chat open. I would encourage you to ask questions. If there's anything that you'd like me to cover, if it's something that we're going to be covering anyways, I might skip ahead and I might just say we'll wait until we get to it. So, jumping right in. When we're talking about special needs trusts, we are talking about any kind of a trust arrangement that is established for the benefit of a person with a disability. This often is going to be someone who is receiving some form of means tested benefits, something like Medicaid or SSI, supplemental security income, some form of benefit where the government cares about either how much property you have or how much income you're making. And the assets in a properly drafted special needs trust are not treated as part of that beneficiary's estate for the purposes of qualifying for benefits. And the income in the trust is not treated as income to them again, for the purpose of benefits with an income test. So when you think about special needs trusts, there's any trust lawyer can tell you there's an effectively infinite array of different kinds of trusts. I could probably name dozens of different flavors of trust off the top of my head, but I won't subject you to that. But for here, what we're talking about with special needs trust, there's two broad categories. One is a standalone special needs trust.
It's not going to hurt my ass, my muscle sore. No, I can try. Yeah.
We all mute ourselves,
No,
please?
Kelly, yeah, Kelly, would you mind muting yourself?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'll be more on top of that.
No fear. Um, so a standalone special needs trust, I drafted many of these when I was in private practice. This is when you have a specific trust agreement that is drafted, typically for one beneficiary, but you would go to a lawyer, a guy like me. You would write it out exactly the way you want. You'd pick your trustee, et cetera, et cetera. But again, you get one trust agreement for one beneficiary. A pooled special needs trust is a different sort of animal. A pooled special needs trust has one trust agreement, but can take multiple or even numerous beneficiaries who join by way of what's called a joinder agreement. So you don't write a separate trust for every person. That has pros and cons, but mostly pro if you know how much a bespoke special needs trust tends to cost. So again, for a pooled special needs trust, you might have one trust instrument, one agreement that thousands of beneficiaries are being served under. And the structure of a pooled special needs trust, again, it's a type of special needs trust, but by law, these are all established by a nonprofit. That's just the way that Congress has set this up. I have a question here. Can I transfer my standalone trust to a pooled special needs trust? The answer is yes. There are a number of different ways to accomplish that. And in fact, as we go into this, we have a number of clients who have joined CCT because there was a special needs trust established, let's say, with a sibling of the beneficiary as a trustee, and it can damn it. I had a lot of hard conversations with my clients when they were thinking about setting up special needs trust, but it can damage the relationship. Sometimes the trustee is not able to keep up with the regulations. There are a lot of reasons why a trustee might need to step aside. For a professional trustee, they don't want to administer a trust below a certain dollar figure. I mean, that's just what it is. For a for-profit trustee, there's a limit below which they don't want to keep running a trust because they're not making enough money off of it. So a lot of our clients come from situations like that where there's just a need to move on, and you still want a professional trustee. You want a group that has the ability to keep up with regulations, that has a couple lawyers on staff, maybe, such as myself. Yeah, we accept a lot of that. And another question: what is that dollar figure? It depends completely on the trustee. I have seen professional trustees that will take trusts as low as $500,000. I recently spoke with a representative of a trust company that does not take special needs trusts that are smaller than $2.5 million. Whereas by contrast, we're a nonprofit, we're a pooled trust, so we have some options that other people don't, and we can take trusts as small as $8,000. And that's a figure that you'll see. You'll see similar figures among other pooled trust organizations, of which there are a number. So, with a pooled trust, again, like I said, a nonprofit has to establish it. That's the way the feds set it up. They typically have lower fees and lower minimum funding requirements than a for-profit professional. And the reason for that, it's not just that it's a nonprofit, so you don't have the same profit motives involved. It's also because I mentioned earlier that a pooled special needs trust has one trust agreement with many beneficiaries, and a pooled special needs trust pools those assets together for investment purposes, but they still track them separately for each beneficiary. So John Smith's money goes into the trust. He's got 10,000 bucks. That 10,000 bucks is John Smith's. It gets interest, it's invested, of course. It's going to grow if it's not used for John Smith's needs, but it's in an investment pool with all of these others. So instead of having numerous small investment accounts with all of the fees involved with that, we have one very large investment account with between 180 and $200 million in it. So we get extremely favorable fees from the financial institutions we work with. And the result of that is that our annual fees for our beneficiaries, which we still need to take to keep the lights on, are very low. Our annual fee for most of our trust is 1.09%, which is very low for professional trustee services. And again, we're able to do that because we're run by a nonprofit and because we can do this pooling, which again gets us tremendously cheaper and high quality investments than would otherwise be the case. So when we talk about someone who has a disability, these definitions are going to be familiar with some of you already, uh, but we're talking about disability the way the Social Security Administration looks at it. So for an adult, we're talking about someone who has a medically determinable physical or mental impairment, which has lasted or is expected to last at least a year or to result in death, and which makes the individual unable to engage in substantial gainful activity. So many people might have a medically determinable physical or mental impairment. I have diabetes, but that doesn't stop me from doing my job. So what we're talking about, the people who can really benefit from a special needs trust are people who fall into this category. For a minor, it's slightly different, slightly less restrictive. A minor must have a physical or mental condition that seriously limits his or her activities, which has lasted or be expected to last at least 1 year or to result in death. And the reason that I bring the minor's definition up is that for anyone who is on a means tested benefit, someone who is disabled and who is receiving assistance from the state on that basis, you are retested at 18 to see if you fall under the more restrictive adult definition of disability. So, for anyone who has like a minor child or a minor loved one who has a disability, who might be getting SSI or Medicaid, you need to be ready for the retest at age 18. So who we're looking at in terms of who can benefit from a trust like this, someone who is disabled, as defined by the Social Security Administration, someone who may currently be receiving means tested benefits. We're going to get into that more, but we're talking about SSI and Medicaid primarily, or who might be applying for those in the future, who has some assets that will jeopardize their benefit eligibility, or who is vulnerable and perhaps not able to manage his or her own finances. So this is the category of people who you really might think you might be thinking about special needs trusts. A lot of the people who we serve are people who are living with a disability, who are receiving some form of benefits, and who unexpectedly come into some money. That can be from a personal injury award. Very sadly, we have a number of beneficiaries who received funds from a wrongful death case, from a loved one who was taken. It might be an inheritance given by someone who did not set up their estate correctly. And so, several times I have seen grandmother passes away. She left $15,000 to each grandchild, and one of the grandchildren has a disability of some sort. You've left him enough money that he's no longer going to qualify for benefits, but not enough money to really have a positive, tremendous impact on his life. So what do you do with that money? If you don't want to spend it right away, you can sock it away in a special needs trust, a pooled special needs trust sub-account, so that it can be used for that person, but it's not going to cut them off from their benefits. I'm going to give you some case studies. And some of these will be things similar to what you've seen in your own life. Paul is 12 years old. He has a disability as a result of a birth injury. He's receiving services under a Medicaid waiver. We'll talk a little bit about Medicaid waiver programs. and his parents are planning to apply for SSI when he turns 18. His parents meet with an estate planning attorney to set up their estate plan, with the goal being to ensure that Paul's provided for after their passing. I set up a number of estate plans for people in very similar situations to this. Other end of the scale, Maria. Maria is 64 years old. She has Parkinson's disease. She is receiving long-term care Medicaid and residing in a skilled nursing facility. As her daughter is driving Maria to a doctor's appointment, their car is struck by another driver who is fortunately properly insured. Not always the case. Maria is injured and hospitalized for several days. They engage a personal injury attorney. They file a claim against the insurance company, and the insurance company offers a settlement. And again, you've got someone who is receiving benefits, who is living with a disability, and who unexpectedly comes into some funds. This is not the way you want to come into money, but it happens all the time. And again, the question there is, what do you do with that money so that it can still help Maria, but that it's not going to harm her by reducing or removing her benefits? Speaking of benefits, just like trusts, there are multiple categories. There's two main categories here of benefits that we care about. One is if you hear any screaming or feet running, my children have just returned home from Awanas. I'm down in the basement, so you might hear some feet thumping. But benefits. There's means tested benefits, which are really the ones that we're concerned about keeping. Yeah, we're going to talk about ABLE accounts. ABLE accounts can be a really fantastic tool for similar situations like this. And there are some situations where an ABLE account would be indicated, some situations where a pooled special needs trust is going to work better. But no, ABLE accounts are wonderful, and we'll talk a little more about them. I got a question in chat. So for means tested benefits, primarily we're thinking of supplemental security income, SSI, and Medicaid, versus earned or entitled benefits, which do not have an income or an asset test. So we're talking about things like supplemental Social Security disability insurance and Medicare. These are programs that benefit people, but that they're really paid for by someone who has worked and is paid into the system, and it's paying back out for the benefit of them or their children. So there's no asset test there. When we're talking about SSI, it's a monthly monetary allowance. The maximum in 2025 is $967 a month, but it is a check that the beneficiary would receive every month, and it is intended to pay for food and shelter and basic living expenses. You, I'm sure, are aware $967 a month is not enough to pay for food and shelter and basic living expenses, but it's not nothing. It helps. An adult is eligible for this if they are disabled, blind, or aged, 65 or older, and they have limited countable resources. It's going to be $2,000 of non-excluded resources, and they have limited countable income. And a lot of those numbers are going to change year by year, not the 2000, but income limits change. So this program, again, is something that is designed to help provide for the basic needs of life for a person who is receiving it. And that has some implications that we'll get into later on when we talk about in-kind support and maintenance, because the government giveth and the government taketh away. SSDI, a similar program that offers it's a monthly stipend essentially for someone who either has been a worker and paid into the system, or for a disabled adult child who became disabled before the age of 22 of a worker who has become disabled, retired, or passed away. So we have a number of beneficiaries who are the disabled child of a worker who are receiving SSDI. Technically, there are some situations where the disabled spouse of a worker can receive it. Much, much, much narrower category. I have not actually seen one of these in the wild ever, in my years of practice or in my years working with a special needs trust. So I wouldn't worry too much about that one. Medicaid is the other big means tested benefit that we're concerned about, because Medicaid is a federally funded health insurance program, and it's tremendously valuable to those who receive it. When we get into remainder policies, we're going to talk about sort of what happens to the funds in a PSNT after the beneficiary passes away. And that's Medicaid really is important in that context. But one of the things to know about Medicaid is that much like there are an effectively infinite number of different kinds of trust, there are honestly an almost infinite number of different flavors of Medicaid program. There's the basic Medicaid health insurance program. There's Medicaid long-term care, which pays for skilled nursing facilities. There's Medicaid waiver, which is an interesting animal that allows for skilled nursing facility level care to be provided to someone who's not living in a facility, who's living out in the community. Um, there's Medicaid expansion, which is there for people whose income is low enough to qualify, who are not necessarily disabled. It's there to help people who cannot get an Affordable Care Act plan, but who also don't qualify for standard Medicaid. So it's there to sort of fill that gap. And every state administers their Medicaid program slightly differently. I work for a pooled trust that operates all across the country, and this is a giant pain in the neck for us, but we roll with it. You know, we do our job regardless. But generally speaking, the eligibility for Medicaid you're going to see is the same as the eligibility for SSI. And in fact, some states simply use an SSI determination to determine if you qualify for Medicaid. Medicare, that's an insurance program for people who are 65 or older, or who have been receiving SSDI for 2 years and are continuing to receive it. There are other groups. We're not going to get into it. It's corner cases. But again, this is an earned or entitled program. And these programs fit together in some ways. If someone is receiving SSDI that is below the SSI rate, so if they're receiving $500 in SSDI every month, SSI can kick in to give you the extra 467 that it takes to reach 967. And likewise, Medicaid covers costs of care that Medicare doesn't. So many, many, many beneficiaries are on multiple of these programs designed to try and meet their needs when they need that kind of assistance. So getting into special needs trusts and pooled special needs trusts specifically. There are a couple of different kinds. There are several different categories here. Earlier in our two examples, Paul and Maria, with Paul, his parents are planning to leave funds to a special needs trust. With Maria, she's come into her own money and is wanting to put that in a special needs trust to protect her benefits, but still be there to be used for her. And that is the distinction here, third party and first party. Paul is going to get a third party PSNT account. The grantor, that's the person who sets the trust up, can be anyone other than the beneficiary. It can be a parent, a family member. I have seen a friend do it, but that is rare to have a friend like that. It can be funded through an estate plan or a life insurance policy or investments or a house or whatever the case may be. Anything as long as it's not the beneficiary's money. These can be revocable or irrevocable prior to the grantor's death. So that means you can go in and tinker with them before passing if you so desire. I helped some people do that more than a few times. And they are not subject to what is referred to as Medicaid payback. So, for a first party special needs trust, that is a special needs trust that is established with the beneficiary's own money. I'm going to give you the government's perspective on this. The government's perspective is they are allowing that person to take a pot of money and put it somewhere it can still be used for that person's benefit. So it's still being used for that person, but it's not treated as that person's asset when it comes to qualifying for public benefits. From the government's perspective, that's cutting you a pretty good deal. And they are going to extract some concessions in exchange for it. One of them is you've got to genuinely give up control. When you set up a first party special needs trust, a first party PSNT account, you're putting that money in someone else's hands. You're not the master of that ship anymore. The other concession is that there is, when you pass away, when the person who is receiving Medicaid passes away, Medicaid is going to present a bill to the trust and it's going to expect to be paid. That bill is for 100% of the money that has been distributed from Medicaid on behalf of that beneficiary for their entire lifetime. I have seen Medicaid bills like that go up, into millions of dollars, depending on the needs of the person. So that's important because for Paul's parents are setting up an estate plan. They're going to be funding a third party pooled special needs trust account. When Paul passes away, whatever's left in that account is going to flow out to their remainder beneficiaries. That might be to other family members. It might be to charities that they're favorably inclined to. It's not going to the government. Versus Maria, because Maria was a first party trust, it was set up with her money. When Maria passes away, that amount, whatever's left in the trust is not going to go to her daughter who's, been faithful and driven her around and so on and so forth. It is more than likely going to be consumed by the government. So what you should take away from that is to plan. It is important. The vast majority of human beings, certainly in America, pass away without any real form of an estate plan. But if you plan ahead, if you put in the elbow grease while you're alive, you can help make sure that the funds that you leave for the benefit of a beneficiary with special needs, when that person passes away, it's going to go again to fund charities that you like, to go to family members, to it'll go where you want it to go. So just keep that in mind. It's good to plan. So first party pooled special needs trusts, and that was, as an estate planning attorney, forgive me my little tangent. It's just good to plan. Under federal law, a first party PSNT must be established by the beneficiary, by the legal guardian, parent, or grandparent, or by a court. An agent under a power of attorney can also sign it if the power of attorney has proper authority. And these are funds that either belong to the beneficiary or are owed to the beneficiary, like Maria's settlement. Again, that's money that's going out to her. These are always irrevocable. They're subject to Medicaid payback. And this is really one of the nifty things. Per federal law, you are not allowed to establish a first party standalone special needs trust for anyone who is age 65 or older. You can't do it. It doesn't work. It's against the rules. It's just not an option. But a first party PSNT account, which protects your benefits just the same, can be established past the age of 65, which is sort of neat. There's some details to that. There are some other things you have to worry about, but it's good to be aware. If you know someone who is over 65, who is receiving some form of benefits and who comes into money, there actually is an option out there, even though generally speaking, you can't set up a first party special needs trust after 65. So something neat to know about. And again, we've talked about this a little bit before. We're going to go into more detail here. Why would you set up a standalone special needs trust like I wrote many of in private practice versus a pooled special needs trust subaccount? We're going to go through pros and cons here. So if you set up a standalone special needs trust, that trustee, the person running it, can be anybody you want who's willing to do the job. That can be an individual, it can be a family member, a loved one, an attorney, it can be a corporate trustee, it can be a bank's trust department. But you can pick anyone you want. A pooled special needs trust, by contrast, must be run by a nonprofit organization. You don't, if you're setting up a pooled special needs trust subaccount with Commonwealth Community Trust, CCT, we're going to be running it. You don't get to choose a different trustee if you want a trust account with us. That's just how the law is written. An individual trustee, I talked about this earlier. I had a lot of clients who thought it was a great idea to put child A in charge of child B's trust account. And sometimes that works out. Very, very often it doesn't. I've had this conversation with my own parents. I have two sisters with considerable special needs. Um, and I have seen in my practice uh, that caused tremendous problems with the family relationship. When one child or uncle or whatever, you got that one person who you would hope would be, a family member. You'd want a loving relationship, but that person is suddenly the gatekeeper standing between this beneficiary and the money that he considers his. That is a recipe for trauma and damaged families. It is not a good situation to be in. Sometimes it works, not something that I would personally accept. Um, Again, I've had this conversation with my own parents when they set up their estate plan. So I've been through this. Um, I've talked about balance requirements already. If you're using a professional trustee, honestly, $100,000 minimum limit is tremendously optimistic. I don't think you're going to see that in the year of our Lord 2025. Again, I've seen minimum limits, minimum as high as 2.5 million, versus a pooled special needs trust is going to have a lower minimum balance requirement. And that can be really helpful for someone who is maybe receiving a smaller inheritance. Maybe they come into some money from a small personal injury award. Whatever the case may be, we've got accounts that are up into the many millions of dollars. We're very comfortable, administering that kind of thing. And we have accounts that are down to just the bare minimum that it would even make sense to do the work to set it up instead of just spending it. We already talked about the 65 and older. And this is another thing. One big reason why you might do a standalone trust rather than a PSNT, despite the different, the a PSNT is a lot cheaper, but one of the reasons why you might set up a standalone trust is if you have unique assets that you want to hold. Because a pooled special needs trust can only accept assets that can go into the pool, which essentially means money and investments. We have the ability to hold real estate that the beneficiary is living in. But aside from that, basically, we're talking liquid assets or near liquid. So if you have a collection of fine art that you really want to be kept in this trust, a PSNT is not going to do the job. Um, and I can, I'm flippant talking about fine art, but there are any number of different kinds of assets that that you might want to keep for someone's benefit that a PSNT is not necessarily going to be able to do. So first party PSNTs, we're not going to get into too much detail here. This goes into the law under which we operate. Ober 93, the legal and regulatory framework that PSNTs live in is essentially established under these three prongs. You've got the federal law, you've got the Social Security Administration's manual, and then we've got state laws and regulations, especially for Medicaid recipients. Uh, so the checklist, and this is something we pay a lot of attention to because it hasn't changed yet, but you never know. A first party PSNT is not a countable resource if it's established and managed by a nonprofit, if you maintain separate accounts for each individual that are pooled for investment purposes. The accounts are solely for the benefit of disabled beneficiaries. There's a limit on who can establish these accounts, and you need that Medicaid payback provision. And again, if you have a first party special needs trust, so this is someone who is putting his or her own money into a special needs trust for his or her own benefit. When that person passes away, Medicaid is going to present a bill and they are going to expect it to be paid, with a few exceptions, which again should be a reminder, plan ahead. It is well worth the effort of doing some estate planning on the front end, for the benefit of of your loved one, for the benefit of the person, other people in your family who might receive some of those funds when that person passes on to his or her reward. This is one of the complications I mentioned. A number of states have what's called a transfer of assets penalty. This is if I said if you're over 65, you absolutely cannot set up a standalone first party special needs trust. It's just not allowed. You can establish a first party PSNT account. But if you are 65 or older when you transfer that money, some states assess a penalty. We can go into more detail on that maybe at some other time. I don't want to take the time to dig into it at too extensive depth now. Just know that it's an option. Over 65, need a first party trust. You can set up a pooled trust. Sometimes there is a Medicaid penalty. Now, this is one of the big things that you want to know about. As I said, when this person passes away, Medicaid is going to come and present a bill. Now, the federal statute that pooled trusts operate under, and this is sort of neat. And I'll take a minute to answer a question. If someone turns 65 while having a standalone trust already set up, you are in the clear. You just can't set it up after 65 or put more money into it. But if you've got one already set up, you're right as rain. And you can then flip that into a pooled trust sub account if you so desire. You have a bunch of options. You just can't set it up after 65. Again, for first party. For third party, there's no age limit at all. Third party trust, I could establish a third party special needs trust for a neighbor down the road who's 71 who happens to be disabled. There's no age limits there. That's just for first party. Again, the first party trusts have their own special set of restrictions, just because of the government's perspective, which I already went into. But anyways, this is sort of nifty. The federal statute that pooled trusts operate under says that a pooled trust can retain a remainder after a beneficiary dies and apply it to their charitable purpose rather than paying back Medicaid. And that's kind of cool. It's because pooled special needs trust nonprofits serve the same population that Medicaid does. We've got this special dispensation. So it can be really nice to know when you're setting up a first party PSNT that even if there is a very large Medicaid payback, those funds or a percentage of those funds can be applied to a charitable purpose, can be used to fund. We have what we call our charitable fund award that we fund with remainders, largely, but it can go through this organization that has been helping this beneficiary to help other people, and that's cool. That's neat. This does come with an important reminder, though, which is that anyone who is receiving these public benefits who has a special needs trust, you should pay for burial and funeral expenses during their lifetime. There are numerous ways to do that. It's typically referred to as pre-need. You can do it through a funeral home. You can do it through an insurance policy that's set up to authorize that. But that's important because for a first party special needs trust, when that person passes away, it's going to be frozen until that Medicaid situation can get sorted out. The money is not going to be available for the funeral. And funerals can be expensive. And it can be a tremendous shock to a family for someone to pass away and they come and say, well, we need money from the trust to fund the funeral, and they can't get it. So if you know someone who has a special needs trust, it can be a tough conversation. But setting up the funeral, paying for the funeral expenses in advance can be a tremendous bang for your buck. I've gotten a There we go. So for third-party pooled special needs trust, these are not a countable resource if they're funded by the benefits of anyone besides the beneficiary. Anyone on God's green earth, just not you, not the beneficiary. If it does not give the beneficiary the ability to revoke or terminate it, that's a question of state law. Our trusts are all operate under Virginia state law, so I know how that works. That's why I'm licensed. That's my stomping grounds. And it doesn't give the beneficiary the authority to direct a distribution. So this is something that is really foundational for any special needs trust. To be treated as an excluded asset, the beneficiary cannot be the one who is steering the boat. The beneficiary cannot demand a distribution. The beneficiary has no power to direct the trustee or the trust administrator to do anything. And the pooled trust must be established and managed by a nonprofit. Again, that's been, the law for going on 40 years now. And I think it's served us well. So, remainder policies for a third-party PSNT, that's going to differ from organization to organization. Our policy is that when a third-party beneficiary passes away, we just turn over whatever is left in the trust to whoever the remainder beneficiaries are and wish them well. We don't take a percentage; we just hand it over. Again, there's no Medicaid payback. It's not something you need to worry about. And where was? Oh, and we already talked about first party. All right. So this part is sort of where the rubber meets the road. Like I said, just some practical nuts and bolts. Well, how do I actually use this thing now that it's set up? Or how does my loved one use it? What the pooled trust job is, they disperse funds prudently and for the benefit of the trust beneficiary. They avoid potential loss of government benefits from an inappropriate distribution. For example, you can't just give somebody cash or cash equivalents. That's a no-no. That can cause problems with their benefits. You maintain accurate accounting. You've got absolute discretion over trust distributions, which we just discussed. Beneficiary does not have. In practical purposes, the beneficiary has a say because we care about what they want, what they need, but they don't have the ability to direct a distribution. And we invest our trust assets prudently, highly conservative. We have some more moderate options, but we try to make sure that we're good stewards of funds. And this is really some of the core of it, because now we're talking about how the beneficiary accesses the funds. A beneficiary is going to be making a request for a distribution. Like I said, cannot demand it, cannot direct it. And the pooled special needs trust is going to be looking at some factors. Is it a prudent request? We try to get to know our beneficiaries. We have masters in social work who are assigned to each of our beneficiaries to get to know them, understand the situation, so we can try to tell what's a prudent request. Do we have the funds to cover the request? And there we also think about like over a long period of time, not just do we have the funds right now. Is the request for the sole benefit of the beneficiary? Many, many, many people who have a disability or who have special needs, who may be on public benefits of one form or another, many, many, many people in these situations have friends who are not really friends. We had a situation where there was a young man who had a first-party special needs trust set up under from a personal injury award. He got hit by a vehicle. It was a few $100,000, and he had a young spouse who requested a car to drive him around. We look into who owns the car. It's her parents. Okay, we found a less expensive option. They come to us, they want to buy a house. Who owns the house? The wife's parents. There was about a year and a half of large requests for distributions coming through this young lady that all would have served to drain his trust and give the money to her parents, to her family. We see situations like that. We see situations where a parent or a sibling is financially exploiting people, and we keep a darn sharp eye out for to make sure that doesn't happen. Question is for TrueLink cards. Yeah, we think TrueLink cards are a tremendously useful tool. We like that we can block. So one of the ways that a trust can pay for things is through a pre-loaded Visa card. There are several people that provide these. We use TrueLink, but it allows us to put money from a PSNT account onto this Visa card where it can be used by the beneficiary or by someone acting for them. But it allows us to block off certain categories that like liquor stores, as an example, firearms stores. Um, I don't have a problem with guns. I enjoy shooting from time to time, but for most of our beneficiaries, it would not be a wise use of their trust funds. Um, Anyways, again, we look at consistency with what the beneficiary's stated objectives are, what our budget is. We look at the intent of the grantors, if it's a third-party trust, and then we look at if this request is going to jeopardize their benefits. And I want to talk, so briefly going to go over this. I got yapping about some things, and we're gonna butt up on time in a few minutes. But the process by which this works, the beneficiary or someone acting for them, like an advocate, is going to submit a request with supporting documentation. Our master's trained staff reviews it at the beginning. We've got an in-house disbursement committee that consists of myself, our president, and all of our client services coordinators to review complex requests. And then we have additional layers of review as needed. Some things are very complicated. So we try to make sure that we've got adequate review at all levels. The kinds of distributions I mentioned that could jeopardize someone's benefit, there's two that I want to get into before we're done. One is the sole benefit issue. This is for first party special needs trusts. And so it's a first party special needs trust. These distributions must be for the sole benefit of the beneficiary. Now, that was relaxed in 2019, thankfully, to clarify that some collateral benefit to someone else is acceptable. You can pay for a house for a beneficiary, and you don't have to worry about it causing a problem if her kid lives there too. It's okay that it's not absolutely for the sole benefit, but there are limits. You wouldn't want to be paying for a 10-bedroom house for one person. You can only sleep in one of those beds at a time. And then, let's see, I'll head back. The other issue is what's called in-kind support and maintenance, which is, I mentioned earlier for SSI, supplemental security income is designed by the government to provide for someone's basic needs, including their shelter, their rent, their housing, the roof over their head. So if someone else, such as a trust, is paying for your shelter, the government is going to reduce the amount of SSI you get. And this, again, this is something that an individual might not know about this. They might not be aware of their reporting requirements for making certain kinds of distributions. Um, but this also gets into one of the areas where we can use ABLE accounts. That were the question earlier. So an ABLE account is a neat tool. It can be established for anyone who became disabled before the age of 26, although in a very few weeks that's going up to 46. January 1st, you can get an ABLE account if you became disabled before the age of 46. It's going to open up a huge swath of people who are now eligible for that extremely useful tool. So if you have someone who's receiving SSI, you can put money into their ABLE account from the trust, which can then be turned around to use to fund their shelter expenses like rent without reducing their SSI because it's not treated as if it's coming from a third party. A question, an example of what you would have to have a request for. Well, request is what we sort of how we consider any attempt to access the trust. So for our TrueLink cards, for example, someone might send in a request. They might have worked with us to develop a budget, and they say, okay, I need $1,000 from the trust every month to pay for these various expenses of living. And so they'd put in a request that says, "Can you upload $1,000 on my card at the start of every month?" Um, so it's just how it's anytime they're requesting funds out of the trust, we consider that to be a request. Sometimes it's a request to fund for to buy a car, but really anytime they're wanting funds from the trust. But for many, many, many of our beneficiaries, we work with them to develop a budget, and we just do regular uploads to their card so they can use it pretty autonomously. Um, you know, it's not a great feeling to have someone else in charge of your money. That's not enjoyable. I would not enjoy that. Um, and we're very cognizant of that, and we do what we can to give our beneficiaries dignity and a feeling of autonomy. Even though by law we have to be the ones making the decisions, we can do a lot to alleviate the frustration that very naturally that can cause in people. And it's something our staff is very good at. All of our staff that does, the direct like relationship building with clients are masters in social work. We have a licensed clinical social worker on staff. Actually, I tell a lie. One of our coordinators has a master's degree in special education and 20 years of experience as in special education. So, as I'm sure you can imagine, she is extremely good at working with our younger clients. All right, so benefit. So different ways trust can be spent. Medication, obviously. Any medicine, medical services that aren't provided for by other programs, your daily living, things like tablets, transportation, whether that's a car, the occasional Uber, home modifications, travel, because look at a special needs trust and you can think, okay, this is for someone who has special needs. This is for medical necessities and things like that, but it's a lot more than that. Because quality of life is a completely valid reason to want to use some of your trust. It is totally legitimate to want to have some nice things. It is totally legitimate to want to go on an occasional vacation if the funds in the trust can support it. Um, so you don't need to think that it's totally locked away and it's only like the bare bones necessity of life, because that's absolutely not how a compassionate special needs trust administrator is going to be looking at it. That's not, you you can't treat humans like machines because we're not. You need you know, things like an occasional vacation, some time off. No, I'm going on vacation next week, which I'm looking forward to very much to spend time with my family. But that's not what we're talking about here. Anyways, the way we disperse funds, it can be directly to a provider. I already talked about the preloaded card, which is a tremendous option. We can pay credit card statements. Again, a way to give people autonomy. Um, we can reimburse people who have expended money on behalf of the beneficiary. There are ways to make sure that whatever the beneficiary's needs are, that we have covered them. It should be obvious. If you're on means tested government benefits, we're not going to give you cash. We're not going to give you cash equivalents. That is going to be income to you. It's going to seriously risk your benefits. This also, I'm not going to get into too much detail. There was a case recently. This is very, very rare, and every profession, as a lawyer well knows, every profession has its bad apples. But there was a lawyer down in Florida who established a pooled special needs trust, was very effective in marketing it, and embezzled $120 million from people with disabilities. I I don't even have words for that. He's in jail, and he's going to be in jail probably for the rest of his life. He's currently being held without bond, awaiting trial on criminal charges. Again, very, very rare, but this is just some tips on sort of how to do due diligence. You want to look at what people's fees are. Different groups have different fees. You want to see what the remainder policy is. Are they open with things like their investment policies? Are they on their website? We keep that stuff on our website because we want to be very transparent about it. Um, if you ask them, are you audited? They should have a quick answer. They should be able to provide you with documentation that yes, we're being audited and not just by ourselves, which was how that organization was doing it. You can look at how long they've been in operation, how many people they serve. You can look at their board of directors. A large and active board of directors providing oversight is probably the best way to make sure that the PSNT you're dealing with is legitimate. You can look at the staff, you can look at their qualifications. Again, we keep all this stuff on our website. We have tons of information on our website, tons of disclosures. Um, there's a lot of information there if you want to check it out. Um, and again, little quality of life things. Do they answer your calls? Do they return your call, same day or next day? If you're looking at an organization to potentially hold funds for a loved one or for you, and they're not picking up the phone when you call, they're probably not going to pick up the phone when your loved one calls after you are dead. I apologize for being blunt, but that's what you can look at. When I was in private practice, I had some clients who very much wanted me to say something like passed away. And the northern neck that I mentioned, that peninsula, a bunch of farmers out there, guys who would come in to see me in my attorney's office with dirt under their fingernails because they've been working on the farm all day. And they, generally speaking, wanted you to say when you're dead. Just different strokes for different folks. Uh, so there's a quick checklist here for vetting pooled trusts. You can find variations of this around. And now we're pretty much out of time. I already mentioned able accounts, so let's go to any like one or two last questions in the few seconds we have left. And if not, then I will simply say thank you all for attending. I appreciate the time that you've given me this afternoon. Um, and I will wish you all a very pleasant remainder of your day. My contact information is here. And if you lose it, there are not that many Tiefenbacks in America, so I'm easy to find.
Ben, would you mind just briefly maybe putting your contact information in the chat so people could just copy it real easily if they want to?
For sure.
And really appreciate your time on this tonight. There is Julie Faust had a couple of other questions. I don't know if you got to them. One was like, what can I?
I will get to those in just a second as
Okay.
long as we have time. Let me pop this in. There we go. So the question would be, why can't I use my card at Walmart? And the answer would be that would be something that was determined by whoever the trustee was. We have had beneficiaries who we have had to put restrictions like that on because we had a beneficiary who we found out eventually was buying gift cards and trading those like as just cash, using them like cash to buy things that might not have been fully legal. Um, so there are reasons why that might be restricted, but that would be something to discuss with a trustee. Um,
All right. Well, Ben, thank you so much. We'll let you get back to your family and just appreciate your time tonight.
right on. Feel free to give me a ring or shoot me an email if you have any other questions.
Great.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.